The restaurant glowed like a palace that night. Every table gleamed with fine china, crystal glasses reflected the warm flicker of candlelight, and the faint strains of violin music floated in the air. Conversations mingled, laughter of the wealthy, murmurs of business deals, and the clinking of wine glasses, all creating an atmosphere of untouchable luxury. At a corner table, partially hidden from view, sat Alexander Varon. At 34, he was already one of the youngest billionaires in the world, a man whose name commanded respect and fear in boardrooms across continents. His empire stretched from finance to technology, and he was known as much for his brilliance as for his ruthlessness. People said Alexander's heart was as cold as the skyscrapers he built, steel, glass, and impossible to penetrate. Yet that night, he wasn't in his usual circle of politicians, CEOs, or celebrities. He had come alone. His tall frame leaned slightly against the backrest, his dark suit impeccable, his piercing eyes scanning the hall with the sharpness of a hawk. But deep within, he carried a heaviness, one he never allowed anyone to see. Nights like this, hidden among strangers, gave him a strange comfort, silence disguised by noise. As his glass of wine touched his lips, his gaze wandered to the back of the hall. The kitchen doors swung open and closed rhythmically, letting out bursts of hurried voices and clattering pans. Then he saw her. A young waitress, perhaps in her mid-20s, slipped through the doors, her hands trembling as she balanced a tray. Her eyes darted nervously across the room, avoiding contact. Her smile was faint, fragile, as though it took every ounce of strength to keep it alive. Something caught his attention. Her face wasn't just tired. It was strained, as though it were holding back a flood of emotion. When she vanished back into the kitchen, he felt an odd pull, something he couldn't explain. Minutes later, through the small glass window in the swinging door, he caught sight of her again. This time, she wasn't pretending. Her back was against the wall, her face buried in her hands. Shoulders shook. Tears streamed. Alexander set his glass down. His jaw tightened. He didn't usually care about strangers, he had built his empire on keeping emotion out of business and life. But for some reason, this sight didn't let him look away. Maybe it was because her tears weren't polished or theatrical, like the crocodile tears he'd seen at countless charity galas. They were raw, honest, the kind that came from a heart drowning. He raised a finger, signaling the waiter who had served him for years. The man, surprised to see Alexander even speak casually, rushed over. "That waitress," Alexander said quietly, his voice low but firm. "Who is she?" The waiter followed his gaze. "Emma, sir. She's been working here for almost 3 years. Always polite, always hardworking. Never complains. But, things have been hard for her lately." He hesitated, lowering his tone further. "She's a single mother. Works double shifts to support her son. We don't know the full story, but tonight, she doesn't seem like herself." Alexander's brows drew together. A single mother. The words unlocked something inside him, something buried deep beneath layers of pride and power. He remembered nights when his own mother came home exhausted, her hands blistered from cleaning offices, her eyes red from hiding tears she thought he couldn't see. He had been just a boy then, listening to her sob quietly behind the bedroom door, vowing to himself that one day he'd change everything. The memory stung. He had kept his vow, he had risen, conquered, built an empire. But along the way, he had buried the tenderness that once drove him. He pushed his chair back abruptly. "I'll be back," he told the startled waiter. As he strode toward the kitchen, the staff froze. A billionaire walking into the staff area was unheard of. The hum of voices dimmed. The clatter of pans paused. All eyes followed him, wide with shock. Inside the kitchen, Emma stood against the wall, clutching a crumpled letter in her hands. Her cheeks were wet, her eyes swollen, but when she noticed him, her entire body stiffened in panic. "Sir, I'm sorry," she stammered, quickly wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. "I'll return to the floor right away. Please forgive me. I didn't mean to be unprofessional." Her voice was trembling, but her words were laced with dignity. She wasn't begging, she was apologizing. That struck him. Most people, faced with his presence, tried to flatter him, to gain something. She was only worried about doing her job. But Alexander didn't leave. He took a step closer, his towering figure casting a shadow over her slight frame. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, softened in a way even he didn't recognize. "What happened?" he asked. Emma froze. Her instinct screamed to keep quiet. Why would a billionaire care? Why burden a stranger with her problems? But the weight she had been carrying for weeks broke through her restraint. Her lips quivered. Her eyes filled again. "It's my son," she whispered, clutching the letter tighter. "He's only 7. He's sick, his heart. The doctors said he needs surgery, and it costs more than I could ever make in years of working here. I've tried, double shifts, extra jobs, but it's never enough. Tonight, I got a call. His condition is getting worse." Her voice cracked, and the kitchen seemed to fall silent around her confession. She turned away, ashamed of showing weakness. "I shouldn't be telling you this. Please, forget I said anything. I'll get back to work." But Alexander didn't move. His eyes were fixed on her, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir in him. Empathy. Memory. The ghost of his own childhood. He remembered the exact words his mother had once said, "I'll work as long as I have breath in me, Alex. You'll never go without." He stepped forward, his expression unreadable but his voice steady. "Take me to him." Emma's head snapped up. "What? Your son?" Alexander repeated firmly. "Take me to him." Her mouth opened in shock. "Why? Why would you?" Alexander's eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, the mask of the ruthless billionaire slipped, just slightly. "Because I know what it's like," he said quietly. "To watch someone you love suffer and feel powerless to stop it. I won't stand by while it happens again, not to your son." The room felt suspended in time. Emma's chest heaved, her heart torn between disbelief and a fragile flicker of hope. The man before her wasn't just a billionaire tonight. He was someone who had looked into her pain and recognized it as his own. And though she didn't know it yet, his next move would not only change her son's fate, it would shock the entire world. The night air outside the restaurant was crisp, the city lights glowing like scattered stars across the skyline. Emma walked quickly, her heart hammering in her chest, still clutching the crumpled letter. She could barely process what had just happened. Alexander Varon, a man she had only ever seen on the covers of business magazines, was walking beside her as though he were an ordinary man. He didn't seem impatient, didn't bark orders into his phone, didn't treat her like she was invisible. Instead, he walked in silence, his hands in his pockets, as though he too carried the weight of something unspoken. "Are you sure about this?" Emma finally asked, her voice breaking through the silence. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why are you doing this?" Alexander didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes ahead, his footsteps steady. "When I was your son's age, I nearly died of pneumonia," he said quietly. "My mother couldn't afford the hospital bills. We had no one, no help. If a kind neighbor hadn't stepped in, I wouldn't be standing here today. I promised myself that if I ever had power, no child would suffer the way I did." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "So, don't ask me why. Just take me to him." Emma's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak. Within the hour, they arrived at the hospital. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, and the sound of beeping monitors echoed faintly down the corridors. Nurses bustled past, their shoes squeaking against the polished floors. Emma led Alexander through the winding hallways, her hands trembling as she pushed open the door to a small ward. There, lying on a narrow bed, was Lucas. His small frame seemed even smaller beneath the thin hospital blanket. His cheeks were pale, his lips faintly blue, and yet when he saw his mother, his face lit up. "Mama," he whispered, his voice weak but full of warmth. Emma rushed to his side, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "I'm right here." Lucas's eyes then shifted to Alexander, curiosity flickering in his gaze. "Who's that man?" Emma swallowed, brushing back her son's hair. "He's a friend." Alexander stepped forward, his tall figure looming over the boy's fragile body, but his eyes softened. "Hello, Lucas," he said gently. "I'm Alexander. Are you Mama's boss?" Lucas asked innocently. Emma flushed, embarrassed, but Alexander only smiled faintly. "No, son. I'm just someone who wants to help." The door opened, and a doctor entered, his face weary. He nodded politely to Emma, then looked at Alexander with a spark of recognition. "Mr. Varon." "Yes," Alexander said briskly. "Tell me what needs to be done." The doctor blinked, taken aback by his directness. "The boy has a congenital heart defect. He needs surgery as soon as possible, but," he glanced at Emma, his voice softening. The costs are. Don't say it, Alexander interrupted, pulling out his phone. Arrange the surgery. Call the best surgeon in the country, I don't care what it takes. I'll cover everything. Not just the surgery, his medication, his aftercare, everything. He turned slightly, his voice sharp now. And I don't want excuses. Time is not on his side. Emma's knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the bed for support, tears spilling down her cheeks. Sir, I don't even know how to thank you. Alexander looked at her, his gaze steady. You don't need to thank me. Just take care of your son. News spread faster than wildfire. Nurses whispered in the corridors, stunned that the world's coldest billionaire had not only walked into their hospital but had taken personal responsibility for a poor waitress's child. By the next morning, journalists swarmed outside, desperate for a glimpse, but Alexander refused interviews. He stayed in the hospital, his presence quiet yet commanding, ensuring that everything was handled perfectly. Days passed. The surgery was scheduled, and top surgeons flew in on Alexander's private jet. Emma barely slept, spending every moment by Lucas's side, whispering prayers into the dimly lit ward. And though she tried to stay strong, there were moments when her fear broke through. One night, as she sat by the bed with her hands clasped tightly, she whispered into the darkness, "Please, God, don't take him from me. He's all I have." A deep voice answered from the corner of the room. "He won't be taken. Not while I can do something about it." Emma turned, startled. Alexander was seated in the shadows, watching. Silently. He had been there for hours, unnoticed. His gaze was fixed on Lucas, but there was something in his eyes, a pain she couldn't quite name. The day of the surgery arrived. Emma paced outside the operating room, her nerves unraveling with each tick of the clock. Alexander stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back, his face calm but his jaw tight. Hours stretched into an eternity. Every sound from the room made Emma flinch. Finally, the doors opened. The lead surgeon stepped out, removing his mask, and Emma's breath caught. It was successful, the surgeon said with a tired smile. Your boy is strong. He's going to be okay. Emma collapsed into tears, her sobs shaking her shoulders. She covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed with relief. Beside her, Alexander let out a slow breath, the tension easing from his body. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel, peace. When Lucas woke up days later, color returning to his cheeks, his first words were, "Mama, I feel better." Emma kissed his hands, her tears wetting his skin. She turned to Alexander, who stood quietly by the window. "I don't know how to repay you," she whispered. Alexander walked over, kneeling slightly so he was level with Lucas's bed. He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "You don't need to repay me. Just grow up to be kind, Lucas. Be better than the world around you. That will be my repayment." Lucas nodded solemnly, as if understanding the weight of the promise. Outside the hospital, cameras flashed, and the world buzzed with speculation. Headlines screamed about the billionaire's shocking act of compassion. Social media exploded with praise. Yet Alexander refused every interview, ignored every request for a statement. For him, it wasn't about the world's opinion. It was about a boy who could now run, laugh, and live. Weeks later, as Emma prepared to leave the hospital with Lucas, she turned to Alexander one last time. Her voice trembled. "You've given me more than I could ever dream of. I'll never forget this." Alexander gave a faint smile, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "Neither will I." As they walked away, hand in hand, he stood there for a long time, watching them disappear into the sunlight. And deep inside, he knew something had changed in him. The world called it shocking. But for Alexander Varon, it wasn't shock at all. It was redemption.